Let's bring John McMullen into this conversation now. As John, you know that the changes to the kickoff apparently are coming, but maybe faster than we thought. I mean, this time of the year to make these rule changes, you don't typically see that, but it looks like there could be some tweaks between now and the start of the season, and this would be a big one.
Yeah, and that's been the NFL really over the past few years. Sort of fly by the seat of their pants, do things, and then sort of come back to them. The helmet rule is even a better example of that. They instituted that rule. We don't know what the rule is. They instituted a rule. We don't know what it is because they haven't come up with a definition yet for it. So it's backwards. And this is just a slow march to eliminating the kickoff from the NFL completely. That's where we're going. This is just another step towards that direction. I heard Ozzie there describe, and he's completely right. It's a question of entertainment value versus safety. The legal issues from the league standpoint are too great, and they got to get the play out of the game. So that's where they're going, and that's where we'll end up.
So what's the fight? That the agents and the players' union don't want the play out because you'll lose jobs, right?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. I mean, the NFL is really, really bad. They've always been really bad with unintended consequences. That's one of them. You mentioned a guy, I heard Steve Tasker. There's been many, many players in the history of this league that have carved out roles as simply kick returners, and that was their main job. We all know some of the great special teams players and coverage players. Yeah, you're going to eliminate some jobs if you don't need those players. So from the union's perspective, that's a problem. And I freely admit it's a difficult question for both sides. And that's why I've always said they need to sit down and they need to either come to a stipulation, which is something we all know. And I heard Bill say that, you can't eliminate concussions. Well, you can. You can eliminate concussions, but the only way you can is to stop playing football.
That's right.
And that's not going to happen.
Can I ask a question that I think some people look at me crazy when I mention this, but do you guys, Bill, I'll ask you first, think that playing without a helmet would actually be safer?
No.
No, I agree with Bill from the perspective, if you look at the concussions in soccer, for instance, nobody cares because the league's not popular. MLS in the sport. Worldwide as a whole, it's far more popular, but generally people outside this country aren't as, use whatever adjective you want to use, but they let adults make decisions for themselves. And the concussion rate in soccer is tremendously large, as it is for rugby, as it is for Australian rules football, you name it. I mean, if you're playing a physical sport, you're going to get concussions.
My point is really back in the day they wore a leather helmet, okay, something of some sort of padding on your head. But that the fact that they have this weapon on their head, they're more inclined to use it. You take that off your head, guess what your head's not going to be? Going to make a tackle.
Well,
yeah, I think some of the weaponized hits would leave, definitely, if you have no helmet. So, for instance, the Ryan Shazier horrible injury, that probably doesn't happen. But as far as concussions, no, you're going to get significant concussions no matter what. So I do think it can eliminate the most horrific of injuries. And maybe that's positive. But again, you're taking away from what made this sport what it is the number one spectator sport in America. Now, maybe a lot of people don't care, and they don't care about the entertainment value. But understand, if you continue, and you and I, Mike, have had this discussion a lot, you continue going down this road, it might not be tomorrow, it might not be next year, it might take 10 years, but eventually the popularity of this is going to erode because people are not going to like the product.
Not only that, guys. I mean, you're starting to see leagues pop up with younger kids playing flag football and regular tackle football. They had that study the other day about players under 12. I mean, you start to keep having more and stuff like that. And now if you have kids playing flag football at ages 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, how are they going to be able to, how's the game going to survive?
Yeah, I think that's the bigger issue long term is the NFL and football as a whole is losing a public relations war. And you do have a generation growing up that believes if you play the game of professional football, you are destined to live a life where you're battling with dementia and things of that nature. It's not true, but they have not gotten their side of the argument out there properly. And I think the major reason why is because they're afraid. And they're afraid of what a lot of people are afraid of. And that's sort of a toxic culture where people will shout you down if you don't conform to their views. And the NFL's afraid of it, to be blunt.
I agree with you, and I think that if you look back in the days, they were going to outlaw football when they were wearing these leather helmets because of the concussions, and actually people were dying. You remember, I think the president had to step in, and they actually made the Maxwell Club, and because of all these injuries and because people were dying, so they had to change some of the rules even back then, and they put this, this piece of plastic, hard plastic, and it did reduce one thing. It reduced skull fractures. The helmets on their heads were designed and made initially to stop skull fractures, not for concussions, not for anything else, because as you know, they didn't even know really about concussions back then. They just knew you got your bell rung. It was a badge of honor to get your bell rung and get back in the game. So they did stop the skull. They did stop that. But now with these guys and the players getting bigger, stronger, faster, it's just gotten worse. So they would have to significantly change the rules, even if they took the helmets off, just because of the way the game of football is designed. They're gonna somehow your head's gonna get involved, and it's not gonna be good. So they're doing it. They're having a lot of advancements, and this game is really popular. But they're gonna continue down that road to try and make it safer. So you may give up some things, but it's still a great sport, and it's not going anywhere.
Well, I will say, and I tell Mike all the time, and I was in the Eagles locker room last year on the day the study came out that claimed there was a 98% rate or some astronomical number of CTE in the cases looked at. And every Eagle said they would continue playing football, every single one of them. So I think there's always a difference between the way 25-year-old people think and 55-year-old people think. And I think I've always said at some point the owners and the players are going to have to sit down at a table and realize they're both being attacked and realize they're partners and stipulate to the fact that this is a very dangerous game. And it's a cost-benefit analysis. If you want to play it, you're going to get hurt. It's just a matter of where that injury comes from. You know that, Billy. It might be a knee. It might be concussions. It might be something far worse. Everybody knows ultimately, eventually, at some point, you're going to get hurt. And either you stipulate to that, and you continue on playing the game and let adults make decisions like the rest of the world does, or you go down a different path. Unfortunately, I think we're going down a different path right now.
Well, I agree with you, and Mike and I were talking about this before, and with this game of football the way it is, it's amazing when you hear all these injuries, and then as you just said, you poll the players, and they said they would still play.
And I wonder if the players had I mean, do they have any say on these rule changes? And would they say, "Why are you guys changing these rules? We don't want these rule changes."
Yeah, they're involved.
Angry.
Yeah,
they're angry. I can tell you flat out, they're angry with the helmet rule.
What is the helmet rule you're referring to for the people out there?
And that's the case
the
that
college game, right?
Initiate helmet-to-helmet contact. We don't know. We ultimately assume, again, the NFL.
This is the one that went back from about we were talking about with running backs. Every time they put their head down, they'd be flagged.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
By definition, I don't think that's the way the NFL is ultimately going to call it, because there'd be a flag on virtually every play, every other play. And again, that would lower the entertainment value of the product even further. However, they haven't defined what this rule is going to be. They instituted it before they defined it. So the players don't exactly know, but they're not happy with it. And that's, from the players' perspective, though, they have to shoulder some of this blame, because when I talk about guys, I'm polling current players who all say, no, they would continue to play this game. But you think differently when you're later in life. And if you are 55 and you're having some cognitive issues, or you're having some issues with your knees, you're going to think differently. And that's where all this sort of litigation has come from. It's come from retired players who are having issues. Now, the NFL, from their standpoint, they deserve a ton of blame for not taking care of these guys. But that's the past. And they deserve to take a hit for that, and they have a significant financial hit. But from this point forward, there's got to be a partnership. As I said, both sides have to sit down and realize that the game is being attacked from those outside the game, and everybody inside the game doesn't like it. So instead of being adversaries, they need to become partners.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, a lot of these safety rules are being put in, but the players don't like them because they're playing a game that they weren't taught to play the way that they're playing a game the way they weren't taught to play the game.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. We talk, especially for defensive players. I mean, as big as and fast and strong as these guys are, to expect them to stop on a dime like they're a video game is ridiculous, and it's not. It's impossible, number one. And then you take to a point the fines, and there's a financial hit for a player doing his job. They don't like that. So there's a number of things that they don't like with the constant rule changes. And again, though, it's on them as well as the owners to cobble something out and say, okay, if you don't want this rule, for instance, you have to sign a waiver. You have to stipulate not only today are you not going to come back at this league for litigation, but when you're 55 or 60, you can't do it either. That's where we need to get. And there's going to have to be some give and take on both sides, because the pensions got to increase, the health benefits have to increase, and that's all stuff that has to go through the collective bargaining process.
Right. And then you have the college game, which has the new punt rule that they're putting in, where if you fair catch the ball inside the 25-yard line, John, you get the ball at the 25-yard line. So essentially they're saying, we want you to fair catch the ball so that you don't get tackled.
Yeah. And,
that was a big sigh. Tremendous sigh.
Well, because it again, it's gonna it takes away from the strategy of the game. It takes so much away from what makes the game great. Obviously, if you're sitting there in a tight game, and you're sitting there on 4th and 2 from the 50, well, what do you want to do? You want your punter to come in and pin somebody back. And then you make it more difficult. You're completely changing the strategy of the game. And that affects everything, not only the entertainment value, but everything that we know about this game that's made it and turned it into the gargantuan success it has become. I mean, I am shaking my head because these rules they're bad for football.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. A couple quick hitters for you. Des Bryant, according to Adam Schefter, there are far more teams not willing to pay for Des Bryant at the league minimum than there are teams that would even sign him to any contract. is he going to have a hard time finding a job?
Yeah, I think so. I think his best opportunity would have been to take the deal from the Baltimore Ravens. But he's a proud guy. He thinks he's Des Bryant. Just like many of the fans. We talked about it with the Eagle fans. And I think fans in general see big names, and they assume the skill set remains in sort of a stasis. It never changes.
Yeah.
And they assume Des Bryant is Des Bryant. And I've been saying for years on the show, Mike, since the Jones fracture, he's not the same guy physically.
No, he's not.
And he doesn't have any explosion, and he's never been a good route runner. So from a technique standpoint, he can't beat people. And now he no longer has the huge physical gifts as an advantage. And what you have is a below-average receiver. So, no, nobody's looking to pay money for a below-average receiver.
How about the Timmy Jernigan reports recovering from surgery to repair that herniated disc in his back? And, he signed a 4-year, $48 million extension. Younger guy, but, is that concerning to hear that?
Well, I think back surgeries are always concerning.
Yes.
And it's a big guy on top of it. And it was clear he was struggling with something. He was really good the first half of last season and signed the extension, and then he sort of began to lose playing time in the second half of the season, and there was talk of an ankle issue, but clearly the back played into it as well. So he was struggling, and he fought through it, but he wasn't the same guy. And hopefully this surgery can clean it up, but it's one of those you just have to sort of wait and see what he is when he gets back.
ESPN reporting and confirming that the Patriots were interested in Baker Mayfield at that pick there. Is that the Browns basically saying, hey, put something out there so it doesn't make us look like fools?
Well, I think it's the agent more than anything else. And, the Patriots might have said, we're interested if we can get up there. They're certainly looking for an heir apparent to Tom Brady. So it's possible they liked him enough to move up. It's pretty clear the NFL thought more of Baker Mayfield as a whole than most of sort of as what I call draft Twitter, which everybody sort of has a groupthink mentality. So the NFL thought more of him than most of the sort of draft nicks. There's no question about that. But at number 2, the Patriots, even with the 2 first-round picks, they didn't have the wherewithal to get up that high. So I'm not sure how meaningful that story is.
John McMullen. Hey, by the way, guys, if you were looking to get tickets for the Eagles game in London, well, you're out of luck. They are sold out.
Eagles travel well.
I said earlier.
There's going to be a lot of Eagles fans there, and obviously it's a great opportunity to take a unique vacation. So, there are going to be a ton of Philadelphia fans, and I think that was the most interest when the schedule came out. I think the 2 things, were they going to play the Vikings on Thursday night in the opener, and then when was the London game, because so many people wanted to sort of build vacations around it.
John, I agree with you. If you can get tickets and you can get over to London, the first game I ever played in the National Football League, if you want to call that, was in a preseason game against the Cleveland Browns at Wembley Stadium in London. And it was my first time to Europe, and it was one of the most memorable experiences of my life, not just because of playing in front of Wembley Stadium.
So you liked it?
I loved it. And if you were an Eagles fan and you can do this, take advantage of it, I agree with you, John. Build a vacation around it, because the game actually will become it'll become kind of secondary because there's so much else to do and see in London.
Yeah, I'd love to go.
Yep.
Yeah, London, I've been lucky enough to have been there as well. It's beautiful, it is, and it's just,
Shad
Khan wants to put the Super Bowl there.
I don't think the Super Bowl is ever going to be there.
Agreed. You know what? Let them play the Pro Bowl over there. I would think that wouldn't be there. The Hall of Fame game early on. The Pro Bowl would be a good game over there. But
and remember, Shad Khan is buying, the owner of the Jaguars is in the process of buying Wembley Stadium. So there's going to be even more of a tie-in. And ultimately, I do think The league has a mentality that wants to put a team in London. Logistically, I've talked about this a lot. Travel would be ungodly for that team, and also the vast majority of players obviously are going to be from the United States, so they're going to have a difficult time adjusting to a different country. That's a problem. I think ultimately the better solution is to play an entire regular season in London and have each team go once and play 16 games there, but different teams rotating.
Good stuff from Johnny Mack, as always, here on the Sports Bash Live, 97.3 ESPN. We talk to him daily about the NFL here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. Thank you, John. And by the way, as we sit here, the Eagles are expected to sign Holy Spirit native Joe Callahan. So there you go. Some breaking news right there. Looks like Joe is going to sign with the Eagles. John, thanks, pal.
Thank you, guys. Quarterback room gets deeper.